have an aardvark mascot, I think, which is what we need. But
That would be fun.
it's a better name than we used to be, the 5th Planning District Commission. And our boss used to say you could plead the 5th or drink a 5th, but nobody knew where the 5th was. So Roanoke Valley, Allegheny is more descriptive, I think. I guess first I'd like to know that, do you all use any traffic or any trail count stuff up there now? And what would you like to learn from us?
This is Chris with the city. I think with talking with Amanda Ponce, the city and the planning district also as well, and county and others, we've done various, put an intern on a corner and have them sit there with a piece of notebook paper. We have VDOT level counters from Shane and John that transmit the data into the website services. We get the like the eco counters and the pyro boxes and things like that. Some of them have tubes for bikes. Some of them are purely infrared. I just ordered a remote counter for one of our places that's kind of like Carvin's Cove. That's our Ragged Mountain area. It's a very popular trail area, just to get a idea of how many people are out there and when they're out there. I think from my end, and I'm the off-road person, the parks person, I was looking for data to say, well, if you can say there's 327 youth basketball participants because you have a sign-up sheet for that, and I go to city council and go, well, there's a lot of people on the trail. Guess who's going to get the money next year? It's the youth basketball program, and nothing against any of those things. But I was looking for mathematical data I can compare to other things that people have mathematical data for to say what's popular in the parks department or in the city, so we could get more funding. That's a big part of my purpose. And then also as a manager, what days of the week, what times of day, what times of year are we probably more likely to have to maybe go dump the trash cans or patrol the parking lots and things like that. So that's my off-road parks view of it. There's a lot of on-street folks here in the system that might have other desires for the data, like why we're interested in learning how to up our data counting. And I think reporting to our boards of supervisors and types, how you guys put that report together is something we could probably learn from to push our story out to our powers that be.
Okay, well, I can go through just a brief overview of what we're doing here. Maybe that's the best place to start, and then you all can ask questions. So I don't know if I can share my screen. It looks like I can. And you can see that. All right, so we're using traffic counters that Shane Sawyer actually helped set up initially. We had an older system, but this is the one that we went with, and I'll show you the website in a little bit. So it consists of an infrared counter there on the left, and then a dock that we're able to download the data from. So we have to go into the field to get the data. We do that about every 3 or 4 months. We share our counter system with Roanoke County, so they own some counters and they go out more often, I think once a month. So on the left, those little camouflage units, we have about 20 of those, and the dock on the right, we have 1 of those. And I think each thing costs about $500. So this is a typical setup on a pole, telephone pole, and it's just in an electric box that we buy at Lowe's for $15. So we do have to take the contents out of the box and glue some things and punch some holes to get it to set up. And we do lock our boxes. We occasionally lose one, gets thrown in the river, vandalized. Shane can remember some of those incidents. So this is the network that we have in the Roanoke Valley, roughly. I guess it looks like there's more than 20. So Roanoke County, I think, has about 10, and then we have about 15 others that we monitor. So most of them are on paved greenway trails. The Roanoke River Greenway that goes through the middle of the Roanoke Valley from Salem over to Vinton, and we have 3 or 4 counters on that. Then we do have a few at Carvin's Cove, which is a mountain bike area. And then Roanoke County has quite a few at Explorer Park, which is another mountain bike area. So the data looks like this. It's just a text file that we get when we download it. And it consists of header information and then basically a line for each hour. So here's 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7, 8, so forth and so on. So it's very detailed data for each hour. And then we're able to use the software, or the website, which I'll show in a minute, to generate tables and charts. And these are some reports that we generate every year. So the left side of the screen is Garden City Greenway, which is just a summary and has some data by the days of the week and months of the year. Of course, Saturday and Sunday are the highest use days. Then over on the right is a chart that maybe Rachel can talk about a little bit later, which compares the infrared counter, which is counting pedestrians and bicycles, to a bicycle counter that was put at the same location. So we have sort of split mode data for this River's Edge, which is in downtown, well, near our hospital in Roanoke, which is our busiest location of all of our counters. And quickly, Rachel had sent this to me a few minutes ago. This is the percent increase from the pandemic. So these, most of our counts from 2019 to the spring of 2020 were 200% or more higher, which is sort of expected. Our greenways were closed for a little bit in March and April, I think, of 2020. And then when they reopened, they really hit some more peaks through the summer. So let me see if I can share this other screen. Hopefully you can see this is the traffic's website, which is very powerful. And this is where we really get all our information from. So it has a map of all our locations. As we went in and put pictures of where all the counters are. So for example, I have to go check some counters we put in Franklin County that I've never been to before. And luckily we have pictures in here that I'll be able to find them, hopefully. And we have a master summary. We can quickly go and look at all of our counters and by year 2010, 2011, and the monthly totals for each, if it has data, and the average volume for each day. Some of these, of course, you have to consider are two-way counts. So if it's like McAfee's Knob, for example, is a trail that goes up and back. So it's counting everybody twice. So we have to take that into consideration when we're presenting the data. And we have some older counters in here that we have discontinued. We have some temporary counters that are used for a single event. So not all the counters have data for every month and for every year, but we do have data going back to 2010 through 2021 on most of our counters. And as I mentioned, we share this with Roanoke County. So about 10 or 15 of these, Roanoke County is checking and uploading the data to the same website. So we can look at their data and they can look at our data. We can go in and do quick analysis. Picking Garden City Greenway, we can look at a time period that we select, and then it'll generate a graph of whatever we want to look at, any way we want to look at it. So this one is hourly rates for Garden City Greenway. You can look at monthly or days of the week, for example. We can compare sites. Trying to pick one that might be more, that has the same data. So we can compare two different sites, maybe on the same greenway. So it's very powerful and useful, but it's easy to generate these graphs using their software. So that's one thing that we like about it. We can go into a little bit more detail on the management of a site. So for example, I can pick River's Edge here. It can tell me some notes that we put in, like there was some corrosion. We have issues with sometimes the batteries or the wires coming loose, spider webs, insects. We can scan the data set. To look for spikes. So here it's identifying days that have very high counts. And we'll do that each time we upload data to see if there's an issue with insects, or if there was a special event, perhaps there was a marathon race on the Greenway or a mountain bike race that may account for very high counts for a particular day. So we'll exclude ones we think are errors, and we'll include ones that we think are valid. So that's a brief overview of what we're doing here. And I guess Rachel can talk more about the counters that she's using and how we integrate those into our trail count program.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to start with the same question you asked, Matt, only about the on-road counts. If the folks who are interested in that, is there anything specific you're interested in or curious about? Or planning? Or I could just jump in and explain what I've been doing with it. I've sometimes thought a little bit odd that, you know, the way we have it structured, I mean, and it's historical largely, but it's like really split between the Greenway trail counts and on-road counts, that they're almost separate programs. But I mean, there's reasons for that, and it works. And I think from what I'm hearing, it sounds like it's maybe not at all uncommon to have that. But there's kind of a fundamental difference in the approach. Matt talked about, you have like over 20 between us and the county. We have over 20 counters out there. These traffic counters, you know, they're cheap. They're $500 a piece. They're very durable. They don't talk to the cloud. They don't do anything fancy like that. But you physically go visit them to collect the data. Also, once you put a counter up, you tend to leave it there. And sometimes we might move it for one reason or another. They're doing construction somewhere or whatever. But the idea, we don't, with the Greenway counters, we're not like constantly moving them around. For the way the on-road count program ended up working out is we have some counters that are permanently installed, and then we have a couple of counters that we move around the valley. And that's nice because we have the freedom to be able to move these around. So we could count, theoretically, there's no limit to how many we can count. We've got 2 counters and we can keep them moving. We do need to leave them there at least a couple of weeks and generally a month. But really the reason they get left in place is because I just don't have time to go out and move them all the time. And I'm a little embarrassed at the moment that I actually have both of the counters in my office. Sorry, John. These are John Bolachek has loaned us these counters. And part of the agreement is that we're going to keep them out there and they're not going to just sit in my office. So my excuse is I had breakthrough COVID and just haven't had time to get out there and do it, but I will soon. Tomorrow, it's on my calendar. So anyway, those 2 counters move around, but then I have these other counters that are in my mind permanently there. I mean, there's really no difference between the counters. It's just these VDOT has loaned us, and these permanent counters are mostly on loan from Virginia Tech. So that's been really nice to have these partnerships so we can get this equipment, because these counters are not $500 a piece like the traffic counters. John, how much do they cost? Like $3,000, $5,000?
Yeah, I would say with everything included, probably closer to 5.
Yeah. So so we can't have lots of them, but since I have the ones that are permanent, then these others can be moved around a lot. And the reason those permanent ones are so important is that they provide the reference counts. So I can use the permanent ones to calculate a day of year factor for every day for an entire year that includes the period of time that my temporary counter was in its spot. And then I adjust every day that the temporary counter was in its spot on that day of year factor, and I can calculate an average annual daily traffic. So I'll show a little bit of my data. So this is one of the things I was able to do with the counter. This is actually one of my reference counters that I have on Campbell Avenue. And I compared for about 3 months before the pandemic hit and about 3 months right after. And of course, everything was shut down. Well, downtown, there's clearly a lot of lunch traffic. And obviously those businesses were all shut down. There was no office workers downtown. And so that lunch traffic all but disappeared. This site still gets a lot of traffic. It's close to the bus station, and it's in the heart of downtown. There's still a lot of people walking around downtown. And one thing I thought was interesting is that during that 3 months, you could start to see kind of a morning and an evening peak coming through. That's not visible in the before line because this lunch peak sort of overwhelms everything. You can also see that the nightlife just vanished during the pandemic. I think the downtown location gives me some of the most interesting data. I also wanted to share, let's see here. I'll share this next. I usually place these mobile counters, based on requests from localities. So I had, and this was on Melrose Avenue, I had 2 counters located here, and then I ended up moving one of them here because the locality had also requested this location across from that's now the New Horizons. It's a medical location, medical facility. So after the counters had been there for a while, I write up a report, and this originally, it did have some, we did have the counters in the bike lane as well as infrared. So these, I don't have a picture of it. But this counter, it can count the infrared, but I can also put tubes in the bike lane and attach those to the device as well. So you can see at these 3 locations, New Horizons, that's what it was called. At these 3 locations, this is the raw data, just the average, but then once it's been adjusted based on that day of year factor, then now the average traffic in front of Aaron's Rent It was 56 people per day for the, and I mean, so I can say that's an annual number, even though it was 40 for the month or so that it was in place. I do typically give the localities an analysis on, in this case, this is the side of the road because I had one on each side of the road at each of the locations. I can do a directional split as well, eastbound, westbound. Oh, actually, that's what this is. Sorry, Aaron's was on one side of the road, New Century was on the other. So at Aaron's, we have a pretty evenly split between eastbound and westbound, and that's the same at all these locations. It's not always true, but at this location it was. I can also do day of the week and time of day. And then I wanted to also share the back end a little bit. So these eco counters, like I said, some of them talk to the cloud. The ones that I have borrowed from Virginia Tech don't talk to the cloud, and so I do have to go physically visit them. But I do that with my smartphone, so it's a little bit easier than it is for Matt. I don't have to have the shuttle and unlock the box and take things out of the box. I just wave a magnet over the counter, and it connects to my phone, and my phone sucks up the data and sends it to the cloud. So VDOT has all of our counters, and we actually have some of the traffic's counters in this as well on this publicly available map. So that's kind of neat to, that the public can actually see where these counters are and what the traffic was like there. This includes all the places I've counted, even if there's no longer a counter there. Like I counted this location on Main Street in Salem. I think I had the counter there for about 6 weeks, several months ago, but the data is still there. And then this is the data management side for the eco counters. And so this is something I do, and I haven't done this today, so this is a good time to do that, is check just to see what my counters are doing. And look, this counter has been counting. So that's nice to see, because this particular counter, this is the one that vanished for a while. So then I had to do some detective work to get it back. And so that was kind of an adventure. You could do some stuff like Matt was showing with and the weather. That's kind of neat. You can do some fun stuff with this through this platform, but I prefer to download everything to Excel and work with the data myself. One thing Eco Counter doesn't do is so that I could correct for those reference counters, those data. I can calculate day of year factors and correct for the reference counters. So that's something I need to do manually. And actually that concept of having reference counters and then being able to move counters around and then correct for that is something that some other, so Amanda in our office has been doing a lot of the working with Matt on the Greenway and trail counts. And she's not here at the moment, but that's something she's been interested in doing, especially if a counter is only in place for part of the year, or something happened and it had to be pulled for a while because of a flood or something. Well, Traffics doesn't do a great job at handling gaps in data or partial years. And so since you have all those counters that are out there all the time, you could calculate day of year reference counts and still be able to get that average annual daily traffic out of that. Thanks for sharing those links, John. That's helpful. Chris, we should, yes. So what Matt showed you some figures from, or a little bit from the trail counter annual report. And I say annual, it's when somebody has time to get around to it. And so Amanda had put an annual report together for 2020 and 2019, but I don't think it had been done for a while before that. I've been thinking that something like that should be done for the on-road counters, and it would make a lot of sense to combine it into a single report. The report Amanda did was for the Greenway Commission, because a lot of those counters, Matt, weren't they provided by Pathfinders?
You know, the Greenway Commission purchased some of those, but a lot of the requests are just for what Chris was alluding to, that a locality will want a number for a grant or to make some justification for expending funds. So a lot of times they'll just out of the blue ask for a number. What's the latest number for this greenway or this road or something? But,
yeah. On the for the on-road counts, it's usually locality staff that request the location. So, I mean, sometimes I just put something in a location because I'm just curious about it, or someone else is curious about it. But I generally, I mean, that's nice. And I love data for the sake of data, but like ultimately I have to justify spending my hours on this. So I proactively go after locality staff and say, where do you want counts? And then I didn't have a good grasp initially, and I feel like I'm starting to get a better grasp on this, as to why they would want those counts and what they would do with it. Because it's a little different than the greenways, where you are looking at how often should we change the trash and maintain the bathrooms, and you're looking at kind of maintenance things. And people, that's not really relevant to a sidewalk and a bike lane. It's not going to change how often you sweep the bike lane. That's more related to how much crud it gets on the road and fills up the bike lane than what kind of traffic it gets. So the big question is, what do we do with this data, and how are people using this data? There are two requests I get the most frequently that I can't accommodate. One is to know what the bicycle traffic is on a road that doesn't have bike lanes. And actually I say I can't accommodate it. I can now. I do have the equipment and the training and so forth that I can do that. I haven't done it yet. I find the bike lane, counting in the bike lane is a pretty big lift. It takes far more of my hours than just taking this out and mounting it on a post somewhere. That's easy to do. I mean, at this point, that takes like 20 minutes. I allow at least an hour to do it, but it really doesn't take very long at all. But getting out there and pounding nails in the bike lane, first of all, I have to take someone with me. That's not, and then I have to take my car so I can set up my work zone. It has to be 2 people as part of the work zone. But it's also just more things go wrong. And I've really struggled to get good quality data for counting in the bike lanes. So one of the requests we got was to do counts on a place that there is no sidewalk, but there was a pronounced dirt path where people were walking. This is on Ogden Road. And so the Roanoke County went out and installed a signpost, like only 3 foot high, no sign on it, just the post. So I had something to attach this counter to, and I could count how many people are walking across this little dirt path. And they did put that into a grant proposal. It wasn't funded, but some of the data, I think even though this has been almost 2 years now, I think we're still getting to the figuring out what to use the data for. And I'm hoping that as we count more and more places, we can create kind of a more picture of the region and learn more about, so one thing I've learned is that pedestrian traffic in downtown Roanoke is different than anywhere else in the valley. So having 2 reference counters in downtown Roanoke, I maybe want to change that. Downtown Salem and downtown Benton are similar to each other. I think they're similar to Grandin Village, but like all those places are different from downtown Roanoke, kind of fundamentally different. And then I feel like these other, I guess village centers or these smaller downtowns, they kind of share some characteristics, but they're different than, Melrose Avenue. I think it's important to have, to be able to show with numbers the sense of that the people are walking here. Oh, and another important thing is I've been dabbling with Streetlight Insight, and it's got this bike ped module on it. So Streetlight Insight is taking, data, it's buying and selling data from like Facebook and your navigation app and, Big Brother's watching it, whatever. It's all capturing you, and it knows exactly where you were, and it aggregates that data. So I don't know exactly where you were, but I can see exactly where someone was, or some people's were, a bunch of people were. But I can calibrate their bike. They have the bike ped module, so I can calibrate those analyses with the eco counter data. I can enter an AADT for bicycle traffic or for pedestrian traffic for that particular site, and then Streetlight Insight can use that to calibrate and say, and without that calibration index or calibration data, it gives me a bicycle index or a pedestrian index, which is relative to other places. You could say this number is higher than this number, that means more, but you can't say that 56 means 56 bicyclists a day. With the calibration data, the number it gives you is more relevant to actual numbers of people biking and walking.
My power blipped out for a second, so I'm sorry I missed a little section of that. Are there any other questions? Let's see, Shane just posted in the chat.
I got a quick question for Matt. This is Chris again with Parks Department. And I can talk to you offline, but when you do a Carbons Cove type area, I've got another area I manage in Nelson County, and the question they're asking is, should we be counting the cars that come in or the people on a particular trail? Because you have a lot of cars coming in to do multiple activities that aren't all just hiking, and you might lose half of your count if some people hike one way and not the other way. Do you ever count just the cars coming into a park unit? And I saw you had a boat landing thing. I want to talk to you about that one later.
Yeah, Shane can talk about that boat one, but Roanoke County has some magnetic counters. We have one that we don't actually have deployed. It's sitting on a shelf. So they do count cars at a mountain bike area and at another park. So they count the cars entering the parking lot as well as having counts on the trail. So that probably gives them a lot of detailed information. provided that it's recording, correctly. I guess you would want to test it and calibrate it to make sure it's picking up every vehicle. So the Roanoke County does have a few magnetic counters that they use in parking lots.
Okay, cool.
And the boat ramps, we did have some counters at boat ramps. That's way more difficult because you have a lot of different users. You could have fishermen, if somebody's kayaking, they may make 10 trips to the car for the cooler and the poles and the life jackets and the paddles. And so then you have to worry about flood if you need to move the counter whenever the water rises. So I'm not sure how successful our boat ramp ones actually were. We haven't done those for a number of years.
Yeah, John, to follow up on that, you're right. The numbers are not really useful, meaning because one person can make 10 trips, putting in a canoe. I think it was more just comparing the number, I guess not the number per se, but the amount of use at each of the landings. I think we put it at a few landings, and you're right, flooding was an issue. I had to remove the counters more than one time, I think, to avoid them being submerged. But yeah, limited success on that one, but you could see it did record the activity at each landing. So you assume that the same thing's happening at each landing that you're putting in a canoe. You can make some comparisons at least.
Yeah, and that's true with a lot of our counters, especially the ones like in mountain bike areas. It's not counting all the users. It's just on select trails, and we don't really know, if it's counting somebody twice or 3 times, but it gives us a perspective over time of whether the use is increasing or decreasing, as long as we don't move those counters.
Yeah, generally when we talk about it, we say counts, not users, because plenty of these things people are doing out and backs and they're getting counted twice. But generally the count shows you how busy that location is. If there's like a food courier and they're doing deliveries back and forth all day, they're still taking up space and they're still using that facility for a reason multiple times, but it's one user.
Have you had done any before we built it, after we built it counts to prove that a facility had the value that it was expected of? Again, I keep speaking to how do we get more funding for bike lanes and things or trails? And if we could show this dirt path you spoke about, Rachel, had X number of users, but once we built the right facility, boy, it tripled overnight. Have you done that type of effort?
That is a request we've had. So we've done some before counts and we're waiting for the things to be built so we can do after counts.
Yeah, the key on that is actually getting the before counts. I mean, that's always, you got to be proactive and actually know what's coming up and just go ahead and get the counts because you can't go back in time.
One thing that we've noticed on the Greenway network, it started out small, let's say 10 miles, and we had very high counts. But as more greenways have been built, that usage has been dispersed. So the counts have stayed the same or even gotten lower in some cases as people have dispersed. And used different parts of the Greenway network. And that's actually a good thing because that central section was very, very busy and too crowded. So by having more Greenway available, people are now using other sections and that central part is not as crowded. So we have seen that pattern occur.
So Peter, about ground truthing the counts, when we set up the counters, every time I go set up a counter, I check it to make sure it's working. So I walk past it and my phone is connected to the counter, so my phone actually chimes. In fact, it got a really cute little bicycle bell sound when I'm testing out the bike lanes. It's really cute. And I make sure that, and I have to do that also to tell, so the counter tells me so many people were walking in and so many people were walking out. Well, what does in and out mean? So that's the directionality. So I have to figure out, okay, in is north and out is south for this counter at this location. And then the counters that transmit to the cloud, I do check them frequently, but once a week, actually. I mean, because I can do that at my desk. I should do that Monday morning during staff meeting because I'm not listening anyway. So, so I could just check it at my desk. And I can notice if there's something weird going on, like those counts have changed dramatically. And that's how I discovered that one of the counters had vanished. And so the story behind that was it vanished. I went out and looked at where it was supposed to be and realized that the sign that it had been mounted to, it was a new signpost and a different sign. It had been a speed limit sign and now it was a weight limit sign for that bridge. So I contacted the sign crew and said, you changed the sign, what'd you do with my counter? And it turned out that someone had actually hit the sign, broken it into two pieces. And so the sign crew had been intending to change the sign anyway. And they took that opportunity to just go ahead and change the sign. I said, okay, now where's my counter? And so we ended up talking, anyway, I talked to the police department, did a whole bunch of detective work. I was even like calling AT&T. I called Eco Counter and said, what? Because this counter is still sending me counts, just not very many. It's like crying out into the wilderness. So I called Eco Counter and said, what carrier is this counter talking to? And they said AT&T. So I called AT&T and said, so I saw in NCIS they did this, like they could triangulate where someone is based on, right? And they said, well, we could tell Eco Counter where it is. Or maybe it's VDOT, I don't know. Anyway, we could tell the owner of the counter, but we can't tell you. I think it was Eco Counters. They could tell Eco Counter, but they can't tell me. I'm like, okay. But before I got that far any further with that, I talked to the police again and they're like, okay, here's the number of the guy who hit the thing. Why don't you just call him? And I'm like, okay. Like, really surprised he had shared that information with me. But I called him and 2 hours later he had dropped the counter. He just like tossed in his car. He didn't know what it was. He was just sort of like, oh my God, I hit the sign and broken the stuff. And he's trying to like kind of clean up the scene, which wasn't his job, but he didn't know that. Like I wouldn't know that. But he's actually that would have been the sign crew's job to clean up the scene. But anyway, he just sort of panicked and was throwing everything in his car, trying to kind of fix it, I guess, and didn't realize even what it was. So anyway, that was my detective work. So I don't know about ground truthing the counters exactly, but I'm making sure that they're counting me. And if the counters are going way high, so that actually happened at Ogden Road, is that my counts were suddenly going way, way high. And so I ended up going out and looking, and it turned out a bush had grown over the entire counter. So I was counting a lot of leaves. And so from the moment that those counts were going way, way high, I just discarded all that data. So at least I knew what had happened there. Sometimes I put a counter out, it counts me just fine, but I go back and I'm like, there's no way 10,000 people walk past that point. I mean, there's nowhere in the valley that 10,000 people would walk past the point. And it was because if there's a glass window at all, and I thought it was pointed so it wouldn't be picking up, but the glass reflects all the cars going by. So I was getting reflected auto traffic. I was counting autos, which actually there shouldn't have been 10,000 autos a day there either. So anyway, so like you can see if there's some weird stuff going on, and then just go out and try to figure out what's happening.
Have you noticed or factored in, mostly with pedestrian counts, not this wouldn't be with really bikes, but with the infrared counters, perhaps when people are walking side by side, you're not picking up all the people. Maybe it's, it would count just one person when there's three people walking right next to each other.
That's a possibility.
Yeah, there's a way. I mean, you could sit there for an hour and watch people and count them and see what the counter is doing, and then you can put a calibration adjustment into these traffic counters to account for that. We haven't done that in many locations. I think there might be one or two, as I recall, where we've done that, but it's just a matter of time for us of having a staff person sit there and count people for an hour or two.
It's pretty hard. I don't know about the traffic counters, but the eco counters seem very sensitive to that. I mean, because they actually have, there's two cameras there, and they actually have, this is slightly offset, and that's how they do that directionality. So they're pretty sensitive to that, and you have to be really in lockstep and really, aligned for it not to pick up 2 people.
That's good to know. I didn't know that they set up the cameras like that. And Peter makes a great point too, that's a good reason to be ground truthing every so often as well.
It's
Yeah, just-
really an issue when it's very, very busy. So, on things that are sort of like maybe single track and mountain biking, people are kind of one behind one anyway. You're probably not going to have that problem. But if you're on like a busy downtown sidewalk and there's huge groups of people walking by, that's where it could be a problem. And there's methods for doing the correction count. And actually in the software Eco Counter there's a way to like plug in a factor to change what you're displaying. If you say you're missing like 20% of count, you plug in like 1.2 and it'll automatically adjust it.
This might be for you, John, or Shane. With bike ped counts, is it the same like weekday formula to get the AADT as traffic counts, road vehicle counts? Because what I'm going with is maybe commuting wise, it could be the same peak on Wednesdays, but for recreational use, it might be the opposite. How is that factored in with is it the type of infrastructure you're counting on? If that, if that makes sense, just kind of seeing how that all ties in.
Well, that gets back to what Rachel was talking about with the reference counters. So if you do a short duration count, we do them pretty long. We're not just doing it like 2 hours. We'll do at least like 15 days and then we'll call it down. It'll be at least 2 weeks. So that's that's a lot of data. So we get the weekend data. We get 24/7 data for 14 days. And then if it's like the middle of the winter and you have a reference counter for a similar location, you can kind of look at the factor and say, it's probably twice that in the summer or whatever you're trying to do. I don't know that like we ever had a question that couldn't be answered unless we did all that, but that's kind of the theory on how you would do it.
And also getting back to the ground truthing, John and I and some folks in the office, we need to do it more often, but for the Capitol Trail counters, we did go out and do 2-hour counts and then compare the data to the same period in online in the cloud to make sure that it was the same. And we also captured some demographic data while we were out there, just because we were out there collecting, so we did it. And somewhat related, it might be if Charlottesville continues to do manual counts, it would probably be a good idea to make sure that every permanent counter or every counter that is installed in Charlottesville, Albemarle, whatever, that if you're going to do manual counts, do a manual count at those locations that will serve as our ground truth. If you're already there, do a 2-hour count at the exact counter location. That way we've got the manual counts and which we can compare to the online counts, and also we can collect demographic and other helmet type use as well.
Last call for questions. Thank you, Matt and Rachel, for taking the time out of your day to share some of what you're working on. I know there's a lot of interest in these. You all are welcome to stick around for the rest of the meeting. I know we're all busy though, so we won't be offended if you want to step out at this point.
Thanks so much for having us. I'll just write a quick note here and then I'm going to sign off.
Thanks, sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks. The next topic that I had put on the agenda was just to share an update on the MPO Smart Scale process. And this wasn't a very necessarily a very rigid agenda. So we are getting a little off beyond the time that has been allocated. And I do want to make sure that we have time to have a good discussion. So, but we can talk about smart scale to the extent that you all are interested in having the discussion. I'm not sure if we met since the last time that the MPO met already, but the projects that they selected to move forward with for the MPO's projects are the District Avenue Roundabout, which was developed as part of the hydraulic project, the Ravenna River Bike and Pedestrian Crossing, and that's the project that was identified as going through this additional stakeholder engagement process that the MPO had committed to as part of their policy. And then the other two projects that were picked up were looking at Fifth Street, doing some intersection improvements at the Fifth Street Station intersection on Fifth Street, and then extending the bike and pedestrian infrastructure north into the city. And then the last one was extending some of the bike and pedestrian infrastructure along Avon Street. So looking at where the bike lanes drop off, you know, going from the city into the county, and seeing where there could be some opportunities to transition from the bike lanes on the road into a shared use path that was identified as part of the county's study when they were looking at Avon Road. So for the Ravenna River Smart Scale project, we met with the Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee last night. We reviewed a list of potential stakeholders that should be involved in the process. So I'm going to share my screen just really briefly. This is the list that staff had developed of potential stakeholders that should be included, and then the CTAC had a few additional suggestions. At least one of these citizen representatives, my thought is that would be identified as somebody who was involved in the Charlottesville Bike and Pedestrian Committee already. So that was one of the suggestions they had. They also suggested potentially the Ravenna Trail Foundation, Charlottesville Albemarle Greenways, Willow Tree, and they had also discussed having a planning commissioner included as part of the stakeholder group. So I think, you know, we could probably add a few more. I want to be mindful that we also want to manage the group size so that it's a meaningful process and people are participating and we're making sure that the feedback that we're getting is helpful. But if you all have any thoughts or want to share anything related to who should be involved as part of the development of the actual project, I'd be happy to hear that.
Basically, we didn't think it was necessary for State Farm Property to be represented on the committee. They're actually leaving that building location.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the questions, Dan, that maybe you could help clarify is whether or not we need to have the property owner there, if there are potentially any right-of-way impacts, or if that has all been already kind of resolved.
The property that State Farm is located on.
Yeah. I'm not asking you to tell me that one way or the other, but I think that's why that was initially on there. It was more about, we want to make sure that you know, if there are going to be impacts on a property owner, that they're part of the discussion.
Yeah. I think that's a great question, and I would actually, for me personally, kind of maybe defer that to someone who's wiser and has been doing the work much longer than I have. It could kind of go either way. So for example, I wonder, should like Brian Roy be part of that group? But could that also be a conflict of interest, having him be in the group? But you know, there's no doubt that the landowners need to be regular, you know, parts of the conversation, but whether they should be on the steering committee, I think might be a little bit of a different question. I'd, you know, talk to someone who's super smart like Ann Malik or someone to get a sense for that.
Sure. Any other thoughts?
Sandy, I'm developing a big list of stakeholders just so we make sure that we don't miss anybody, that, you know, the steering committee would be a subset of that universe of stakeholders. So that's going to be a Google Doc or a Google Sheet that I'm just starting. I'm going to share that list with you and keep it updated with what you're working on here and vice versa. This is an amazing start though, no doubt. Is the CAT, is that the Charlottesville Area Transit, or is that the Charlottesville Area Trail Runners? Because if it's the latter, I'd say no way. If it's the former, maybe.
Yeah, it is intended to be the transit provider, Kat. And the reason that we think it's important to include them is because there's been a lot of discussion about parking and managing access, and also as far as the other studies that we've been a part of, you know, in addition to the feasibility studies, making sure that we are providing as many alternative modes of transportation to help people throughout the region access, you know, the park and the trail system. So I think we want to make sure that we are coordinating with transit and making sure that they're invited to the table to tell us how they envision being able to coordinate with new infrastructure.
That's super. I think that's so smart. And it's good to extend that invitation. And you're right that we want to capture that thought process. So even if maybe they decline because they're so busy bringing someone from the RTP or someone. So we're thinking about that, like regional connectivity and, you know, solving congestion rather than creating congestion. That's really smart.
Sandy, you mentioned that the Ravenna River crossing would have additional public engagement. I mean, what is the status of that? I haven't heard much about it. I know a while back there was some type of public meeting, but I don't think it was super well attended. And I know there are two specific alternatives that have been developed with considerably different price tags that I think that would need more input than just whoever's going to show up at a public meeting. Because again, that will be relatively limited and will be full of advocates. And anyway, it's just, I'm just curious as to what type of input you're going to seek there.
Yeah, I think the first step is going to be to identify the stakeholder committee, which we hope will represent a wide variety of interests and not just, you know, people who maybe are personally interested in, you know, this for a specific reason, but make sure that there are a lot of different, you know, stakeholders that are involved in the discussion to make sure that we're weighing those. The next thing that we're going to do is start developing this list of factors for consideration as far as evaluating the project. So this was another conversation that we started with the Citizens Transportation Advisory Group last night. This was the list that we started with, and they added a lot of other really good, thoughtful suggestions on potential factors that may be important, like resiliency, water safety impacts, maintenance costs, environmental impacts, etc. So I think as part of this public process, we need to really start prioritizing which of these factors are going to be the most important and create, I mean, we'll have a matrix, but we really need to figure out which of these priorities do we need to focus on. So a lot of this work is going to be done in the stakeholder committees, which will be open to the public, and we'll have opportunities for public feedback as part of those regular meetings. I think we'll really need to think through whether we can do something like a MetroQuest survey, or if not MetroQuest, maybe you know, a simpler format for a survey to really try to get as much opportunity as possible for us to understand what the community priorities are. And then I think we were very successful in getting a large amount of attendance when we did these overviews for the smart scale application. So I think we can go through a public process and then wrap up by presenting any sorts of recommendations along with the other projects that are moving forward within the MPO region publicly, and making sure that we just have a very transparent process. but I'm kind of, this is a process we're kind of building as we go too. So nothing is set in stone, and we can certainly be flexible if, you
And
know.
it would be great to take some lessons learned from the Route 20 project that a few vocal folks can absolutely put the kibosh on a project.
Right.
So.
Yeah, definitely.
I think also from like a timeline perspective, I think you're right on that, like right at the start, you want to be identifying what are the questions rather than finding answers or even weighing one question after another. So, you know, where you had like the virtual version of a whiteboard, get it all on a whiteboard, and also know that new items will need to be added to the whiteboard maybe at the last minute, but we start to lock in, find out who's going to have the answer, and then perhaps even the public can be a part of that conversation about what is the weight. So I don't know, this is just an arbitrary, but folks may be willing to pay twice as much for a better aesthetic, or they may not care at all about aesthetics. And I think that is something that we can collect some data on. And, you know, in the end, it will be a small number of people who make the decision, whether that be the MPO policy board or whatever, but they'll be making a decision that's informed based on the vast universe of knowledge that's coming, you know, from like democracy. So then it can be legitimate, then it can be wise. And I think that's what we want to come out with, is like legitimacy, wisdom, and like a really solid proposal.
Yeah, and I also caution folks, from what I understand, the study, again, I wouldn't post it or pose a question as, where do you want the bridge? Because I brought this up to several people. They're like, oh, it needs to go somewhere else. So again, the study looked at 2 locations, had costs for 2 locations. So I guess you got to be, when you have the public meeting, is it going to be oriented around which of these 2 are you choosing from? I mean, as opposed to throwing it out there, hey, where would you guys like a bridge across the Ravenna River? I mean, we passed that in terms of, you know, there's 2 alternatives that have been developed from a study. If you come up with another location, I guess another study would have to be done, and it'll be a never-ending cycle.
Yeah, we did have our Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee recommend considering another orientation. So I think the right way to do this is to identify what the priorities need to be outside of looking at the actual projects, and then go to the constraints where, you know, whether or not there is another orientation that, you know, does a better job maybe of even addressing the highest priorities that we've identified before we could even put resources into maybe considering, you know, an additional study. But I do hear what you're saying, and I do agree that we need to make sure that we are setting this up in a way to move forward and not constantly having to go backwards and address issues without being able to move forward and identifying a feasible solution.
Yeah, and I also do think that to what Shane pointed out, and it harmed the Route 20 process, is there were non-feasible options were always brought in as sort of paper, whatever things that aren't meant to advance the process, but to stop it. You know, why not make a tunnel? You know, you guys were talking about making a tunnel for the Ravenna River, you know, sewer pipe. Why not make a tunnel for the bridge? Like that kind of stuff just isn't helpful at a certain point. It can be, maybe the magic solution is one we haven't thought of, but we can't dwell on those.
I will continue to keep you updated. I'm sure many of you will be involved in this process as we move it forward. The policy board will hopefully be appointing the list of representative organizations at their meeting next week. And then I can start reaching out and trying to identify who the specific individuals that will serve on that committee. And hopefully we'll be able to start meeting in October or November at the latest.
I looked it up. I want to correct what I said. State Farm is the property owner.
Okay.
They have the interest of leasing or potentially moving is what I understand. And I don't know where things are with that, but it might not hurt to invite and see any interest. We might have to have a list and it might shrink down by who wants to be involved. I don't know.
Sure. I will certainly be in touch, Dan. I think, that's really a summary of what's going on with Smart Scale right now. So really the rest of the agenda is just for you all to, have the floor to be able to let us know if there are things that we need to be working on to coordinate for these meetings, or and then just to share updates. I know our group has kind of dwindled a little bit, but you all have the floor to share what's happening and what you might want to cover in future meetings. Do you want me to call on you, or do you want to just hop in? Amanda or Dan, would either one of you like to start?
I mean, I apologize that I missed the beginning of this. I'd be glad to share. We were awarded a grant, or not a grant, but free technical assistance from EcoCounter to analyze some of our bike and pedestrian count data, which I'd be glad to share the report that they provided to us via email to everyone. We are working still through the Preston Barracks bike lane design. Hopefully that project has been implemented or pushed back to April, May timeframe for repaving. So, see what happens with that. We are submitting our transportation alternatives grants for the October 1st deadline, the Safe Routes to School coordinator position, and Chris has the Meadow Creek Valley Trail project. And I think those are kind of the big things right now.
Dan, anything specific you want to share related to Albemarle?
We have this afternoon and next week, we have some rail corridor pop-up meetings for some public feedback showing it's in stage 3 development, I believe, some recommendations, but it's really to gather feedback. And today is going to be at the center. We'll be there off Belvedere this afternoon. I'll send the link. And then the other locations are at KTAC and I forget, in Putt Putt Place. I think that's next week. And then I had a note here for something else. I'm sorry, one second.
No worries.
We're evaluating the revenue sharing applications for submission. Again, it's Avon Street Bike Ped Shared Use Path Improvement. That's going to be one that we submitted for a pre-app, and the Eastern Ave connection as well, but that's on the radar coming up next month. Pretty much that's kind of the month, what's going on for this month right now. For a one map update, I know that there's been conversations with mostly technical background discussions between the city and county GIS teams. I think that it's not. I think it is moving along, but maybe not at the speed we hoped for. But I think with everyone's, that's being involved with this, that was not in this project early on. I know it's Brian with the county. Committing a lot of time to it, I believe, with the GIS manager with the city, some discussions and some technical guidance, and being able to keep it moving and coordinating that. But I really don't know any expected deadline or progress with that. With the county, as Brian's helping me with this, we're kind of ready with the data, so I think we're gonna try to initiate our data to be accessible on our county web viewer, and take that at least a step towards that. We also was able to, I think VDOT's doing a similar initiative. A consultant reached out to us, and we sent our county data over for QA QC purposes. Maybe Shane Killison reached out to us. Maybe Shane could have more on that, but it seems like, you know, this is an effort that we're all striving to continue. So,
do you need anything from this committee right now, or is this just conversations, do you think, back and forth between the localities?
I think it's good to be asked about it, keep it on the tape, on the back burner, meaning like keep it updated. But you know, I don't know if we were able to give an exact kind of expected end date or anything, right? If you agree, Amanda. I think right. I think it just, as long as it's keep moving. Yeah.
Yeah, just to follow up, VDOT, we are developing a statewide sidewalk inventory, much like we did with the bicycle facilities inventory, which is pretty close to being, we feel very close to being complete, other than some more recent, you know, things that have happened in the last 6 months or so. But we do have a process for updating it. But of course, a sidewalk inventory is a much heavier lift in terms of data. But as Dan said, we've reached out to MPOs, PDCs, localities, looked online to try to get a base data to add to one that VDOT had for, I guess, VDOT maintained roads, not the independent cities and towns that maintain their own roads. So we're trying to build off of that. So we will eventually have it. We don't know how we're going to update the information that we received. Right now, we're just getting it from dozens of different sources and compiling it. And then we will look at filling it in, what's missing. So.
Anything else on VDOT's end that you want to share, Shane, while you have the floor?
Not really, but I would just remind folks that we do have roadway reconfiguration technical assistance available. Roadway reconfigurations is a way of saying road diets without saying road diets. So if you think if there's any candidate locations that where you could basically drop a lane and put in a bike facility, or maybe even narrowing a lane versus dropping one, let us know, and we can look at it. And if it's feasible, we could do, the consultants will do a striping plan. As that would be the deliverable, and hopefully it could be implemented sometime, maybe when the next paving schedule comes along or sooner. So just this out there, just letting you guys know.
Thanks, Shane. Are you referencing like that would be more for routine maintenance pavings, correct?
Ideally, ideally we would get out in front of the paving schedule. We would look at all these locations well in advance of the paving, because it's very easy to miss that paving schedule. And when you do, you're locked out for like 10 years because it's not going to be repaved, chances are. So yeah, it's great to be proactive, look at any places where it could happen, and we can do the study and the striping plan and have it ready for, should something become available, either through the paving schedule or some other project that might be in the area. Just, it's good to know. We need to know what can be done in some locations well in advance, I guess, of any paving.
I have had these conversations with you and the residency. I struggle with finding that list and being and having it prior, ahead of time. I think the issue this past year was this year's routine paving schedule. So it was really hard to be able to accommodate any requests that we had. But maybe this might be a discussion that I'll be able to. Is this information? Is this available online? Is this something that we could make the effort to kind of have the list at the right time and have these conversations with the right people within VDOT as well?
Yeah, one thing, the roadway configuration information is on VDOT's bike ped website. There's a link at the top. I will say that the paving schedule, getting it out in advance can be a challenge, especially if you're outside of VDOT. But again, that's why, if by the time the public sees the paving schedule, it's too late to do anything in that paving schedule generally. That's why, we got to do this a couple of years in advance, because they sign contracts and do the road, which ones are going to be maintained and what they're going to do well in advance. So, again, I understand your frustration, because by the time you see the list, it's probably too late to have anything done. So that's why we need to get out in front of this by a couple, as much as we can, identify some potential locations if there are any, and have it ready for if it works in terms of an upcoming paving schedule. But we can work behind the scenes to get a longer term. I think we can get it out to like 3 years in advance. Internally, I think that's about what we can get from our maintenance folks.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Lucinda, do you want to share any updates regarding the North 29 corridor public meeting?
Sure. We had a public meeting last week for Route 29, the corridor study. It's like kind of north Route 29, so it starts at Airport Road and it goes up to Ruckersville, Deerfield Drive in Ruckersville. There's a couple intersections there that have been on people's radar. Fraze Mill Road is the most popular intersection. And then there's also Lewis and Clark Drive. So both of those intersections had an R-cut planned, and the public made such an outcry at the last smart scale applications that it didn't get funded. That project didn't get funded for Fraze Mill Road to put in the R-cut. So we had a public meeting last week, and we had about 50 participants, and most of them were up in arms that we were considering, that VDOT's considering to put in the R-cut again. So we're hoping that VDOT will reconsider. People were asking for like mitigations that were much less expensive than making a whole new intersection, like putting in rumble strips and flashing lights, because I think the main accident that happens there is between vehicles and its rear ends. So if people are more aware, or there's like maybe traffic enforcement or something. So we're moving forward with the study. We just finished the existing conditions report, and it's available on the website, or I can email it to anybody who's interested. And now Kittleson and Associates, the VDOT contractors, working on alternatives for the intersections identified in the study as needing improvements.
Yeah, and even though it's not explicitly a bike ped study, that is coming up a lot about how we can integrate, bike ped crossing facilities. I think one of the big things we talked about last time was making sure we understand where people are trying to go. That requires them to be crossing 29 in certain places, especially for recreational facilities. So Lucinda's doing a really good job of making sure that stays on the radar for the consultants. Liz, any updates from Monticello that you want to share?
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't multitasking. Nothing new, just that we're sort of continuing to, now that Monticello owns South Lego on the other side of the Rivano, we're really entering into the right-of-way discussion with the county and working with Tim Padalino on that, planning for possibly some leadership kind of level county Monticello visits this fall to really start to see the future potential of that extension of the Old Mills Trail. There's one other, yeah, so that's all.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks.
Peter, anything else you want to mention before our 11:30?
Yeah, sorry, two quick things. Thank you, Sandy, for pulling this together. I know that it was a bit of a mystery for you, and I think it's been great, and that presentation was amazing. Once such that like once the recording's up, I'm going to share that because people are going to want to see it. So this idea of having a good learning experience as part of the meeting was really smart. And then the other thing that I was going to say is that if folks are interested in what's on the minds of the both state assembly and senators, tomorrow the Virginia Outdoor Caucus is gathering at 8 o'clock virtually, and there'll be a number of senators and delegates taking part in that, and I'm going to post it in the chat.
That reminded me of one last thing is that Jennifer Wampler reached out to me. They're updating the statewide outdoor plan. And so we are going to be scheduling a meeting. I need to get more information from her to send out a save the date, but in November to look at their plan. And so I think, you know, I haven't spent a lot of time in that, but I know that that will impact some of you all. So I will make sure to get that on your calendars as early as possible. Any other final thoughts before we go? Okay. All right, if you all think of anything that you want to make sure that we cover in our meeting next month, certainly feel free to reach out. But otherwise, I think I'm mostly going to leave these agendas really driven by you all and what you have happening. So if nothing else, we can leave it on the calendar. And if we decide that we don't need to meet, we can certainly make that decision about month by month, but I'll go ahead and schedule it for next month. All right, thanks everyone. I hope you have a good rest of your week and happy early Friday.
Thank you.
Bye.